Welcome, everybody, to this week's Tales from the Jar Side newsletter. The title this week is Tales from the Jar Side, live stream with Venkat Subramaniam, if you don't know, assumptions in Spring Boot apps, Medium Day talks, AI tools from Java code, and the usual silly collection of Toots and Skeets. The subtitle this week is Why Are There Pop-Tarts but No Mom-Tarts? Is it because of the patriarchy? Oh my. Yeah, I know, really bad, but what are you going to do? I want to mention something before I move on. You might notice it's very small here, but I'll magnify it in the video. I put in a slightly new, what they call a word mark at the top of the newsletter to represent Tales from the Jar Side in a different font and different colors. I'm not sure why Substack makes that so small, but if it's going to be small, I figured I needed to do something to make it a little bit more readable. So I don't know if I'm going to leave it like that or not. It's just a kind of a constant stream of tinkering. At any rate, my name is Ken Cousin, and welcome to Tales from the Jar Side. Regular readers of, before I go on beyond it, almost missed it. I actually got the date right this time. So welcome, fellow jarheads, to Tales from the Jar Side, the Cousin IT newsletter for the week of August 6th through, today is the 14th, 2023. I didn't teach any classes this week, but I did manage to keep busy, so I'll talk a lot about that. Regular readers of and listeners to, and of course the video viewers of this newsletter are affectionately known as jarheads and are far more intelligent, sophisticated, and attractive than the average newsletter reader or listener or viewer. If you wish to become a jarhead, there's a subscribe button on the newsletter itself. Let's take a look actually at the YouTube channel and see how that's doing this week. Unit 5 is a fantastic there. And here we see a couple of things that have changed as well. First of all, it looks like I'm up to 530 subscribers, which is really nice. I'm not sure what triggered a jump in the subscribers, but hey, I'm more than happy to have them along. Welcome to all of you who are here. I hope you enjoy it. I replaced the, what do you call that? I don't know, the title up here, the banner, I suppose they call it a banner, at the top. So I'm actually showing pictures of my books, and all 6 of them there. That's small, but you can kind of make them out. The phrase Tales from the Jar Side, I mentioned the newsletter and code with me. I've got a few icons about things that I tend to write about. The thing that makes it complicated to make a YouTube banner is that the same banner is used on mobile and on TV and on the browsers and on everywhere. And therefore, you have to figure out where things are going to fit so they don't get cut off in the middle. Meredith Marsh, who I mentioned last week, was someone I was following to help me learn a lot of this stuff. In fact, provided a template with all the different boundaries, cut off, indicated, so that I could figure out exactly where to put things. So hopefully this will look good to you. Please feel free to let me know if you have any preferences. Okay, let's go on. Let's not here. Let's go back to the newsletter. So the big thing that happened this week, YouTube related, was I did a live stream with the industry legend, Venkat Subramaniam. Now, Venkat is a character, and he is a good friend who knows I give him a hard time about this stuff. But it's funny when somebody that becomes world renowned, when I know it's our small little world. It's a tiny little niche, and he'd be the first to say, no. He goes lots of places where nobody knows him, but he goes a lot of places where people do know him as well. Venkat is, here's his website, by the way. It's called agiledeveloper.com, and he's got a handful of his books listed, not many. The newest one's is Cruising Along with Java 1 and a second edition of Functional Programming in Java. But if you scroll down, you'll see there's a Scala book and a Kotlin book and a JavaScript book and a Groovy book and Practices of an Agile Developer. So he's written on that, and even .NET. I mean, these are just representative of the things he's done. I like to say that he's basically written a book on everything, you know. And he's also something we didn't really get into on the live stream. He's famous for going to a conference and giving a talk in every available slot. In fact, we call that a full Venkat, is when you are at a no fluff conference and Venkat's giving a talk at every slot available. That's kind of the Venkat track, if you will. You can just follow him along all day long throughout the conference. A royal Venkat is if you also do the keynote address in addition to all those talks. And one time at a Rich Web experience, he did what we then christened a full metal Venkat, which is when he not only did every talk and a keynote, he actually got some people together who had questions about a different topic and did a separate talk after hours that wasn't even scheduled, because of course he did. You know, Nate Shuda, who happened to have done a full Venkat at that conference, is convinced that Venkat did that only to stay ahead of him. So who knows? At any rate, we had a very nice talk. It was very pleasant. What I do on these live streams in general, if you haven't seen one, is I talk about the developer's background. Where did they come from? What was their experience? How did they wind up in the job they're in now? What was their path? And that's what I'm really interested in, is finding more about the person. That's why sometimes I think I have a playlist on the YouTube channel called Tales from Developers, and all the live streams are in there. Now, the other thing I did with that, as I can go back to the website here, the YouTube channel, is I extracted 2 shorts from that. If I go over to the shorts here, one was on how Venkat writes his books, which, a little bit of a spoiler alert, he clears out a 2-week period right around Thanksgiving, believe it or not, and spends roughly another 10 hours, so about 18 hours a day, writing with as few breaks as possible, for approximately 2 solid weeks, and at the end of that has a draft of a book. I mean, and I had to talk to him about that. The other one here was about how he first learned C++, which basically boiled down to he wanted to teach an academic class on C++ back in the 90s, and a professor wanted to teach it instead. This was at, I believe, University of Houston, and of course they gave it to the professor, and like a couple weeks before the deadline, 6 weeks before the class was supposed to start, the professor backed out, and then Venkat had to learn C++ in 6 weeks at an expert enough level to teach it. Yeah. At any rate, those are the shorts that are there. Have fun if you're interested, or of course you can watch the whole live stream if you like. So at any rate, that covers all the stuff here. There's the first short, and then, you know, as Nate Shuda says, is fond of saying, Venkat is remarkably lifelike. Yeah. And then this is the other short on how he writes books. I mean, he's really a very nice person and very friendly. And we had a really good time talking. So I'm glad if anything, it's nice to have him on the channel just as a chance to talk to my friend. But of course, that's probably what's leading to an uptick in my subscriber level here. Okay. Other YouTube activity. Let me show you this as a thumbnail first before I talk about it. One of the things I mentioned last week that Meredith had pointed out to me is that you don't have to repeat the title inside the thumbnail. People can look and see what the title of the video is if they're interested. The key with the thumbnail is to get them interested so that they'll actually click on it. Well, you can see the thumbnail here has got this big "Stop Failing Test Now" with a little frowny face on it like that, and a bunch of failed tests. That's what this was over on the side. The name of the video is JUnit Assumptions in Spring and Spring Boot. I don't know how well those two things went together, the title and the thumbnail. I hope that's interesting. If you take a look at the YouTube channel again under videos, that's got 60 some views, which is pretty good actually. So, I mean, for me, you know, that's not bad at all. So I guess I can't complain too much. I am thinking of uploading a different thumbnail with a different title, because as I mentioned down here, what I really do is that I show 5 different ways that you can use to access a web service from Spring. So these are all clients that you can use inside Spring to access a remote RESTful web service. the standard HTTP client that's in Java 11 and above, the REST template, which is what I've used for years, the synchronous one that's kind of being phased out, the web client class, which is the one they recommend, that's got the Fluent API and it's asynchronous and reactive and all of that. The even newer technique from Spring Boot 3.1 that's called HTTP interfaces, where you just define an interface with annotations like @getExchange or PostExchange or PutExchange, and everything is generated for you. And then an upcoming class that's not even actually out yet called REST Client, which is basically the web client but for synchronous apps. So that one's likely to replace the REST template. The assumptions part of this is that I don't want to access a web service if it's not up, if it's not available. Why should I even try? I mean, my code can't possibly work if the site's down. So I'm making a head request to check and see if I get back a response, and then I'll know the site is up, and then I can go ahead and do whatever I was going to do with it in the first place. So that's what the video is about. I'm thinking of retitling it, however, as something like 5 ways to access remote services from Spring, because people may be more interested in that aspect of it than the assumptions part. We'll see. I'll see what I do with that. Okay, there's a GitHub repository with all the code in it. If you're interested, that's here. Whoops. You sure you want to leave YouTube? How about that? Yes, go to the site. Wow, I haven't seen that before. Isn't that interesting that they now have a little guard there to try to keep you on the site? REST Client version 3. That's the version 3 there is not about version 3 of the REST Client API. It's for Spring Boot 3 is really what it's about. And I have an older one that's for Spring Boot 2. So I had to come up with a unique name there. Okay. So at any rate, I've already explained all this except for one feature, and it's that in the HTTP interfaces. So that was the part back here when I was looking at HTTP interfaces. I was having difficulty figuring out how to do a head request because there's annotations like get exchange and patch exchange and post and put and delete exchange, but there's no head exchange, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. So I contacted Craig Walls, who's another No Fluff speaker, and he's the author of Spring in Action. And he said, well, use the HTTP exchange with method equals get, because down here in the parameters here, there is a HTTP method through the method attribute, and not method equals get, method equals head. And I could then say, oh yeah, use HTTP method head. And sure enough, if you look in the GitHub repository, let's see if I can find that quickly. Yes, you can see here in this JSON placeholder service, let me magnify that a bit, that I've got HTTP exchange setting the base URL. Here is the HTTP exchange setting the head method for this one. There's the get, 2 gets actually, a post, a put, and a delete. Those are all normal. This is the first service I've seen where we actually do a head request, and I use that inside the tests and everything. Okay, so let's go back to the newsletter. There's a link to Craig's book, by the way, and I do say give him the acknowledgement in the video. It was one of those, oh geez, I can't believe I didn't think of that moments. But hey, that's what experts do. They point out the part that you missed, you know. Okay, so I've already talked about that. I've already talked about the banner. And then, oh yeah, last week I mentioned the newsletter. I passed the 500 subscriber milestone, which was really nice. This week I uploaded 1 video, 2 shorts, and a live stream, and that made it so I passed the 100 uploads mark on the videos. I think I'm higher than that now. I think I'm up to 103, you know, which sounds like a lot. I don't know. Again, given that the channel started in January, I think, you know, not bad. So I got, you know, vidIQ sent me that little achievement. And then they sent me this little achievement. I have over 10,000 views now on the channel. They're showing me, if I go back to the homepage, I got to stop that autoplay video again. Is a fantastic. Yeah. I'm at 10,200 some, apparently, lifetime on that. About 1,500 in the last 30 days, for what it's worth. Long way to go to get monetized, but hey, I'll keep plugging away at it. And despite all those little awards they keep sending me, I have not yet subscribed to vidIQ. But it's nothing against them. I don't want to imply there's anything wrong with them or anything they're doing. I just already subscribed to too many things. I don't want to add yet another one. You can see on here, this stuff at the top here is coming from something called TubeBuddy. So that's another one that I'm already subscribed to, which has a keyword explorer and all kinds of other stuff in it. So I'm trying to keep the number down. I'm sure I'll subscribe to them sooner or later. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about Medium Day. Medium Day was held on Saturday, which also happened to be my wife's birthday. So I couldn't spend too much time there. But there was a presentation that was held as part of Medium Day by the Pragmatic Programmers. I think it was organized by my own editor, Margaret Eldridge, and she invited authors from the Pragmatic Programmers to participate in the panel. And I think there were 4 of us in all that jumped in on that. I tried to join right away and I came in late because I couldn't figure out how to let it enable me to be on there. It turned out I had to hit a settings button to enable mic and camera. But at any rate, it was fun. It was only half an hour, so it was not too much depth. But we did get to talk about the process of writing and what brought you into writing as a profession, etc. I still don't necessarily consider myself a writer, but the fact that I write, 2,000 to 3,000 word newsletters every week, and been doing that for 4.5 years. Yeah, I guess I'm going to have to, between that and the 6 books and the blog posts and stuff, I may actually have to acknowledge that I'm probably a writer at this point, even though I'm not a real writer, like some others. Anyway, when there was a question that came up about advice for new writers, for people who are wondering whether I should write a book and what's it like and all that stuff, I was asked last. So all the obvious ones were handled, that it's a big project and that you keep plugging away at it and all of that. And there were a lot of good recommendations from the others, but I had to come up with something unique. So I did kind of echo the idea that it feels like when you first look at it, like you're emptying the ocean with a teaspoon. But if you keep working at it a little bit every day, even, 100 words, or sometimes I'd say 10 minutes a day, because I figure I can do anything for 10 minutes. If you're into Pomodoro technique, then 1 Pomodoro, but that's 25 minutes. Sometimes I can't even muster that, but 10 minutes I could stare at it and work on it. Then, eventually the ocean becomes a lake and becomes a pond and becomes a puddle, and you get there. I didn't say the other side of that you will reach a point where you think you are 90% done. And believe me, you're about halfway at that point. I mean, just because the text is almost finished, the other stuff, all the editing and the feedback and the revisions and cleaning up the code and the intro and the acknowledgments and all the other stuff takes up a huge amount of time that you really almost always vastly underestimate. But I didn't want to discourage anybody, so I left that out. Anyway, don't expect the final book to look like anything you had in your head at the beginning of the process. That's true for every artist. If you count writing as hard, which I guess I do, but the act of actually writing it down changes it all. You will be reconsidering and rethinking through everything as you do it. My Help Your Boss Help You book was my Managing Your Manager talk, and I'd given that talk for 5-6 years. And I thought I had it all figured out and I'd heard every question. And I started writing it and it all changed. It was amazing how different that final product was than what I started with. And of course, the result vastly improved my presentation from then on. Also, this is just me, I'm sure. If you're having trouble writing, tell a story that includes a joke. And if I find that if I have a joke to tell, I will write so I can tell the joke. Then the editor can go, no, don't do that one. Okay, fine, I can take it out. And then I still got all those pages, So it's a silly little trick you play on yourself in order to keep going sometimes. Anyway, so it was fun. I got to put in the caveat about humor, where, humor in any book or in any what I do, my teaching training classes, is very high risk but also high reward thing to do. Most people aren't half as funny as they think they are, which is a little dangerous. And you also don't want to be making jokes when people are confused. They really don't want to hear jokes when they're having trouble figuring things out. So it's useful, like right after a break, to get everybody back into things or whatever, but be careful with it. In Making Java Groovy, my first book, I made sure to put all the actual jokes in the footnotes. You can see there's the Making Java Groovy book. Still at Manning, still get like, I don't know, $30 a quarter. A quarter meaning a calendar quarter. So every 3 months I'll get a check for like $30 to $40, something like that. And that book came out in 2013. So hey, lunch is on me, that's good. Of course, none of this advice applies to Venkat, but Venkat, as we say on the tour, you do not compare yourself to Venkat Subramaniam on any scale whatsoever, except maybe height. On height, even I win on that one. So, of course, he's got a lot more hair. That's true. And a glorious mustache. I should have brought that up during the live stream. I came and went during Medium Day. Again, my wife and I were pretty busy that day, but I did sit in a couple of very interesting talks. One of them was by a woman named Celeste Headley, who's a journalist, and she's worked with NPR and a lot of major sites. I'd never heard of her, but we're all in our own little bubbles, I guess. She talked about a new book she has out called Do Nothing, How to Break Away from Overworking, Overdoing, and Underliving. And the little blurb here, which there's no way you could read. Let's see if I can magnify that. Oh, that's not bad. Despite our constant search for new ways to optimize our bodies and minds, many of us are working more instead of less, living harder, not smarter, and finding ourselves more lonely and anxious than ever. Combining research from fields of neuroscience, social science, history, and even paleontology, journalist Celeste Headley challenges long-held assumptions about personal productivity, revealing that many of the modern habits we cling to in the quest for self-improvement are doing more harm than good. And as someone who definitely suffers from that disease, I'm not as productive as some people. I don't spend as many hours working as people think I do. I waste a lot of time. But my symptom really shows up in how guilty I feel not working all the time. I mean, I feel really guilty taking a break, and that's not good, especially as I get closer and closer to whatever constitutes retirement when you're self-employed, we'll figure that out. I bought her book, and I'll let you know what happens. I contacted her on LinkedIn and she was nice enough to reply. I just said some nice things about her talk. I thought she did a really good job. So that's that one. And the other one was one I was looking forward to by Cory Doctorow. You probably heard of Cory Doctorow. He's a major science fiction writer, and I refer to him as a gadfly. He really likes to afflict the powerful and, give power to the afflicted kind of thing. Really interesting guy. Way too, let's see, what's the right word? He posts way too much for me to keep up with him. I can't follow him on social media sites because he'll post 100 tweet thread without the drop of a hat, and I just can't keep up with it. His title here, again, I'm not comfortable with profanity in general, and I get the idea. You could see it yourself, the term he's come up with, but basically he's talking about, well, here, I'll read you the description. Here's how platforms die. First, they're good to their users. Then they abuse their users to make things better for their business customers. And finally, they abuse those business customers to claw back all the value for themselves, and then they die. And he's talking about how this happens over and over again, especially with a lot of social media sites. The classic example, the one he used in his talk, was Facebook. Course, how they were very nice to people, and then they were good to advertisers and media, like newspaper media and stuff. And now they've taken all the value back and they're collapsing because nobody wants to go there anymore, So we'll see. I did pre-order that. The book's coming out in early September, so I thought, what the heck? I don't know if I'll read it. I do find him a little depressing because he has this tendency to talk about problems that I have no power to change. And that gets a little bit, discouraging. Here's the actual book. He called it the Internet Con on that one. See, I ordered it yesterday, right? How to Seize the Means of Computation. So we'll see. Maybe I shouldn't have supported Amazon by buying it on Kindle, I mean, I'm as bad about this as everybody. Overall, Medium Day was much more interesting than I thought. It wasn't nearly as, it didn't have nearly as many technical presentations as I expected. There was a really interesting one from a bunch of trans activists as well, and I didn't get a chance to listen to much of it, and I didn't want to repeat their names without looking up all the details. But they did a great job, and it was a panel, basically, one moderator and two or three activists, and all four of them, I believe, were trans, and they were talking about a lot of what was going on. I'm a big supporter of trans people in general, trans rights in general. I support at least 3, and there might be 4 different creators on Patreon who I know are trans, although at least 2 of them, that's not a big part of what they do. That on Patreon, I mean, when they're producing their videos or art or whatever, some of it is, but a lot of it isn't. I just happen to like them, And in fact, that was my key, because I grew up in this society too. I had never met a trans person until I was, I don't know, probably in my 30s, I would guess. And would have been appalled had I met a real one. Would have had no idea. I'm as influenced by my culture as anyone else. And the key was following a couple of those trans creators with their YouTube videos. People like, actually, I should put a link inside the video. I'll put a couple links to a couple of really good trans creators that I like. And it was getting to know them through their works. I don't know them personally, but getting to know them as watching how they speak and what they say and what they do, that I began to understand them as people. And of course, that changes everything, right? When the person you're dealing with is a real person, then you don't see them as trans, you see them as them. And then you go from there. And that makes life much easier. Okay, so at any rate, I enjoyed Medium Day more than I thought I would. The replays are out. I might watch a little bit of that. Moving on. AI experiments. This Friday, I've got a webinar scheduled called Practical AI Tools for Java Developers. This is a no fluff, just stuff webinar. Here it is. It's got a little launch button. I guess I subscribed or whatever. I joined it just to make sure I get the notification. It's all done through Zoom. It'll be at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Friday from 1 to 2, actually. And the idea is that this is a practical look at AI tools from a Java perspective. And I plan to talk about the Open AI API, things like working with ChatGPT and the Whisper API and several others, as opposed to working with ChatGPT directly. This is accessing it all from code. I keep running into some frustrations with this, limitations in Java. What I really, really want, by the way, is optional arguments for methods and default arguments for methods, like I have in both Groovy and in Kotlin. In fact, I think that the code I've been writing would probably get cut in about half if I could use Groovy or Kotlin to do it. And I may, in fact, do that. I'm toying with the idea of adding that in, because it's what you're basically doing in all of these APIs is dealing with a RESTful web service. So you have to create the HTTP request and pass JSON data inside it. So you got to serialize everything into JSON data. And then when you get the responses back, you turn them back into Java objects. And I've been using records and text blocks and all these other nice Java 17 features to do it. But boy, default and optional program method arguments would really make life a lot simpler on that. I've got a lot with OpenAI. I also worked with this thing called PicoGen, which is my way of accessing image generation tools in this dashboard here, in this API rather. The API docs are very thin. They really don't give you much at all. They just, again, they show you the JSON request and list all the topics, and then they show you what you get back and display, output, and they give you, here's the image, you have to go get it. And it's been an adventure, and I've got some examples of it. I've got the stability one, that's the Stable Diffusion one, working fine. I'm still having trouble with the Midjourney one. I don't know what's going on. The error handling is not good. If I figure it out in time, I'll include it. We'll see. Also, of course, I'm going to talk about what do you call well, I'll get to that in a moment. Here, by the way, I was playing with Mid-Journey, and I put in Captain James T. Kirk in a lightsaber battle with a Klingon on the bridge of the Enterprise. Oh, I just closed it, didn't I? Well, let me go back to PicoGen again, because just to make sure the Mid-Journey stuff was working, I went to this form they provided, and here was one of them that was generated by Mid-Journey. Again, that's weird. I mean, the lightsaber is not even in his hands, so I don't quite get that one. This one, actually, that's not bad. At least it's got the right. At least he's right-handed in this one. That one, I was like, I don't get that. Not exactly. This is the one I put in the newsletter. I don't know what these robots or whatever Centaurians are in the background. And this, on the other hand, was what Stable Diffusion came up with, although I haven't had a chance to use the new SDXL product, which is supposed to be phenomenal. That one makes no sense to me at all. So, again, I'll play around with it, see where we go, see how it works out. 2 weeks ago, I used the code interpreter inside of GPT-4 to render a figure of the Mandelbrot set. And last week in the newsletter, I showed the Julia set. This week, I made the so-called Buddha-Brot set. I mean, that's a thing, right? I mean, here's the Wikipedia page. You see how that image vaguely resembles the Buddha, I suppose. But it's still based on the Mandelbrot set about elements that diverge instead, rather than converge. So they try to show it here to look like the Buddha and everything. And I asked the code interpreter to generate it, and it struggled once and had to lower the precision, and then they got this, which I guess if you turn your head on the side is what we're talking about. Okay, so much for that. If you're around on Friday and you happen to drop by and you're a jarhead, please wave, let me know, and I will be sure to acknowledge you. So thanks. Let's move on to our Toots and Skeets. Okay, started off the Toots and Skeets with yet another cartoon by Tom Gauld, who's phenomenal. He puts his cartoons in New Scientist, and then he later puts them on social media. So this one says, is it a wiring problem? And the person who presumably is the same one sticking her head up through this hole is saying, I think it might be a little bit more complicated than that. Which, yeah, I can see how that might be a problem. You've got a reality problem. This one, okay, it was time to finally go back to this idiotic cage match between Musk and Zuckerberg. And I like this tweet, or this was a Blue Sky Skeet. So do you realize how off-putting someone has to be to look like the peevish and unethical one in comparison to Mark Zuckerberg? I mean, that's incredible. Musk is making Zuck look like a decent, normal human being, actually the reasonable one, when he's an amoral robot. I mean, seriously, he's a robot covered in human skin, more or less. This was Zuck saying, I think we can all agree Elon isn't serious and it's time to move on. I offered a real date. Dana White offered to make this a legit competition for charity. Elon won't confirm a date, then says he needs surgery, and now asks to do a practice round in my backyard instead. If Elon ever gets serious about a real date, an official event, he knows how to reach me. Otherwise, time to move on. I'm going to focus on competing with people who take the sport seriously. I mean, whack, right? Gauntlet right in Musk's face. And of course, Musk, it turns out, responded this morning with, Zuck's a coward. It's like, I mean, Musk he's too much of a coward to actually get in the ring, and he's way too full of testosterone poisoning to let go without the last word. So I'm, like everybody else, I'm hoping for injuries. I mean, as awful as it sounds, we'll see if anything ever comes of that. This was clever. Again, this was a Blue Sky one. It said, holds up 2 ties. Which one? I have a big meeting today. Both are nice. Wife calls later. How'd it go? Well, wearing 2 ties was a disaster. I have a lot of ties. I haven't worn a tie in, well, that's not true. Sometimes I wear a tie if I'm performing, if, my wife and I sing at weddings and memorial services and things like that. If I'm going to a memorial service, I'll generally put on a tie, but I've never put on 2 ties at the same time. So good. This was clever. It said, book banning in 2023. False alarm, master. It's a mob of book banners headed for the library, and the vampire refers to them as monsters. It's like, yeah, I got to agree with that. And, there's a story every day about, books being taken out of libraries and libraries themselves being shut down. And it's all control. It's all after control. So disappointing. This was a good Lord of the Rings joke. Gandalf saying, I am not trying to rob you. I am trying to help you. And of course, it's a dog with a tennis ball in its mouth. Yeah, very good. Woof. This was a Barbie joke, but this was good. It's not a B, it's a P for Padme. It says she's a former queen of Naboo and sitting galactic senator. He's just Anna Ken. Yeah. For the Padme movie. Is he Anna Ken enough? Right. When that movie does hit streaming services, I'm sure my wife and I will watch it, but I think I can wait till then. Not the Padme movie. We'd go to the theater for that one. But at any rate, this one is, oh my goodness, that's so true. And it says, you can tell Wolverine is a Canadian character written by an American because his superpower is healthcare. And that explains so much. It really does. I hear that. And then this last one was a dad joke. And this one I fell right into. You'll have to let me know if you fell for it as well. It says, the earth isn't flat. And the responder says, correct. And I say, huh? It says, yeah, it's the shape of an Italian car. What? You read my name wrong, didn't you? And it looked like, and my brain auto-corrected it too, flat earther, but it's Fiat earther. Somebody with an Italian car model, Fiat. Yeah, okay, that's a dad joke if I ever heard one. So that was everything this week. We did the Tales from the Jar Side live stream and the videos and Medium Day. Next week, I've got a couple of classes. I got new features in Java. And I've got the webinar coming on Friday. If you make it, please say hi. Thank you very much for listening. And I'll see you in other videos and other talks from Tales from the Jar Side. Take care.